Yes, ma'am. Today also the status is same. She hasn't picked up the call. So I dropped her a message.
So just put in the WTC, Manisha, maybe that join and then.
What should I put, ma'am?
WDC group में डाल दो कि सारे टीचर्स अपने स्टूडेंट्स को the students should come and they should also join for this time.
Okay, ma'am. Just do.
Okay, principal ma'am will join us today. Manisha, Balji, Nuri, everybody is here, right?
जी
Yes,
हेलो
ma'am. We are here. Yes.
सभी को नमस्कार।
Hello, Baljeet, ma'am.
कैसे हैं मनीषा?
बढ़िया बढ़िया.
अनीता जी कैसे हैं?
Balji, सब बढ़िया.
हाँ, जी
सबके खिलते हुए चेहरे देख के अच्छा लगता है।
हाँ सही में
नहीं,
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
आज तो मैं वैक्सीन लगा के आई हूँ, इसलिए थोड़ा सा डिस्कम्फर्ट है आज।
मौसम भी गर्म है ना, तो थोड़ा सा हो जाता है एग्जर्शन ज्यादा, कॉलेज के थोड़े दूसरे काम भी बहुत है, कमेटीज के, डिपार्टमेंट के, बहुत सारी चीजें चल रही हैं साइमल्टेनियसली।
माधुरी और नूतन ना, वो भी आए हैं, आते थे।
Madhuri is there, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Madhuri.
हाय माधुरी, हाउ आर यू?
I'm fine, ma'am. Thank you.
ठीक कैसी हो?
ठीक हो मैम? आप कैसे हैं?
मैं भी अच्छी हूँ। हेलो, हाय नितिन।
गुड
Hello,
टू
Dr.
सी
Nutan.
हाय मनीषा।
एवरीबॉडी।
Ma'am, we are not getting your audio. Is everybody getting? आपको आवाज आ रही है मैम की?
नहीं आ रही।
Okay.
मैम,
हाय वशिष्ठ,
नितिन कैसी है?
बढ़िया, आप कैसे हो?
बढ़िया।
Anita ma'am, we are
आई
not
थिंक
getting your
प्रिंसिपल मैम एक
audio.
बार ज्वाइन करते हैं।
अनीता मैम, आप सुनाई नहीं दे रहा आपकी आवाज।
रिजॉइन कर लें।
यू आर नॉट ऑडिबल।
मैम आप रिजॉइन कर लें एक बार।
ओके। We'll just wait for principal ma'am to join, and then maybe we will. I will kind of text to our guest. That's fine.
Sanskriti, are you getting my audio and video clearly?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Hi Sanskriti, this is Latika this side. I just want to check if you can hear me clearly.
Yes, ma'am. You're audible.
No? I'm audible? Great. Okay, thanks.
Has principal ma'am joined? Can you hear me now?
Ma'am. We can hear you. No, she has not joined yet.
Okay. Has Dr. Latika Vashisth joined?
Yes,
Has he
ma'am.
joined? Can you see her?
Hi.
Yes,
Hi,
ma'am.
Anita. Yes, I'm here.
Oh, hi. How are you?
Hi. I'm fine. How are you?
Good. After a long time, so we get to meet each other, after I think many attempts of getting
Yeah,
into college.
I know. I think sometime in 2018, I was supposed to, you had got in touch with me and something had happened.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the letter did not reach you, right?
Yeah. I mean, there were so many hiccups, but yeah.
Yeah.
But
But
finally,
good,
we are here.
good that, yeah, we are here. We'll just wait for Dr. Nana Hasija to Principal Madam to join, and then maybe we'll begin.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, is that
Yeah.
okay?
Absolutely.
Given her
Yes.
a
Yes.
call. I've given her a call already.
Sure. You're
So
absolutely. That's fine.
5 minutes or so. 5 minutes. Manisha, is she there?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
एक
Yes.
बार प्लीज कॉल कर लीजिए मैंने कॉल करके उनको रिमाइंड तो कर दिया है आप एक बार बोल दीजिए बिकॉज वी ऑलरेडी वेटिंग नो इट्स 5:10 ऑलमोस्ट
Okay, ma'am. I'm trying.
और if she doesn't pick up then call up Bhavna and tell her.
Okay. Okay. All right, ma'am.
I think Sanskriti, we can begin. I just had a word with her. She's in a meeting, so she said that in case she finds time, then she will come. Otherwise, we'll begin with the program. Sanskriti?
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Manisha is back, I hope. Manisha?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just had a word with her. She called me.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So let's begin with the program then.
Of course. Of course.
Okay, Sanskriti, yes.
Yes, ma'am. A very good evening to everyone, and I welcome you all to the fourth webinar of our Gender Sensitization Program series. So far, we discussed how gender is a social construct which emanates discrimination and disparity in the society. It has become the root cause for the exploitation and subjugation of the weaker groups of the community, especially the women, the transgenders, and the LGBTQA community in general. The root cause of all this could be easily traced back to patriarchy and its grips on society, our soch, and the institutions that we have created over the years. The system and society we live in was created by men. It can't be denied that it was created for men as well, ignoring the rightful status and contribution of the rest. Thus, women and women have been considered subhuman in the eyes of law and those in power, even today, believe that women are not entitled to equality, liberty, or justice per se. We all know that misogyny and toxic masculinity over the years have continued their influence on our thoughts and our actions, irrespective of who we are, whether we are a common man, as we commonly say, or or an institution itself. Thus, gender sensitization programs like these aim at creating awareness regarding the social nature of gender, the social conditioning and its ill effect upon us, and how we harm the minority groups, and how we could possibly unlearn our prejudices and contest with the status quo to genuinely make the world a better place. In the Indian context, considering that the freedom struggle coincided with the interwar period, during which the main focus of the women activists and freedom fighters were on two main things. Number one, achieving political rights for women and reforming their personal laws. Thus, the Constitution, while being laid down, was greatly influenced by our framers, especially Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's views on ensuring the liberty, equality, and fraternity of and for all, whether be it Dalits or women. Rightly so, they believed that true development of India could never happen without ensuring the progress of these groups. Apart from the constitutional provisions laid down as fundamental rights or in the DPSP, the government of India at central as well as state level has already enacted a number of legislations to prevent exploitation and harassment of women and to address the issues of discrimination and gender disparity. Central and state governments have been implementing various schemes and programs to overcome gender disparity and provide equal status to women in the country. But having mere laws and policies does not mean that inequalities cease to exist. जब तक हम हमारी सोच नहीं बदलते तब तक हम समाज नहीं बदल सकते और सोच बदलने के लिए समझ का होना बहुत जरूरी होता है और ये समझ जानने से आती है हमारे अधिकार हमारे हक हमारी सुरक्षा के लिए बनाए गए प्रावधान व कानून इन सब से वाकिफ होना इन्हें कब और कैसे इस्तेमाल करना है इन सब की जानकारी रखना ये भी उतना ही जरूरी है As the Gender Forum of Kalindi College, the Women's Development Cell has been greatly pursuing the aim of ensuring a gender sensitive campus that inculcates the value of equality, equity, and non discrimination. It has been organizing awareness programs like these to ensure that young women of our institute can critically engage with the society and its evils to fight and strive ahead. On that note, I would like to call upon Dr. Anita Tagore, ma'am, the convener of Women's Development Cell, on the dais. I request the rest to kindly turn off their microphones.
Yeah, before I begin, I just want to ensure, that it's YouTube live as well. Just, Manisha, can you just check on with Sweetie that it is YouTube live?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Give me a second.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have Dr. Latika Vashisth with us today, and I'm really glad that she could, be with us. And I have been trying to get her even previously, but due to, I don't know, some unavoidable circumstances, we have not been able to meet. But she's going to talk on a very, very important issue today, which is women, looking at women, gender, and the Constitution. And as we have all known, that, formal equality guarantees are already enshrined in our Indian Constitution. But what is important is looking at the substantive inequalities which have plagued women's lives for so many years. And I'm sure Latika, as I had a short discussion with her early today, she's going to look into how the legal system itself contributes, to the gap between the formal equality as well as the substantive inequality. So that becomes a very important perspective for at least people like us, many of us who work on the intersection between feminism and law and politics. That becomes an extremely important moot point to understand that how judgments are read and how feminism also in many quarters has failed to answer questions that are so central to the entire ideology. I think Latika will be best to address all such questions. questions. And we have with us our students, and welcome Latika to Kalindi College. And we hope to get you more and more again and again, you know, to listen to you. And I'll ask Sanskriti to please introduce her and begin with the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Dr. Latika Vashisth is an assistant professor. Prior to joining the Indian Law Institute, she was teaching at the Jindal Global Law School of OP Jindal Global University. She obtained her LLB degree from Faculty of Law, our very own University of Delhi, and pursued her LLM from the Indian Law Institute. She completed her PhD on the topic Law, Feminism, and Emotion, working through the legal unconscious from the School of Human Studies, Ambedkar University. Her areas of interest and research include feminist legal theory, criminal law, and psychoanalysis. She has recently co-edited a volume of essays titled Rethinking Law and Violence. She also co-edited an issue on legal judgments for the Seminar magazine. A renowned academic, especially in the field of feminist legal theory, Dr. Vashisth has delivered numerous speeches and has conducted multiple sessions on the idea of consent, the rape legislations of our country, and the very nature of the Indian law and its interpretation. I welcome ma'am to share her views with us on gender and the Indian Constitution. I request the rest to kindly turn off their microphones.
Thank you so much, Sanskriti. Again, I just want to run through you. Like, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's clear.
Yeah, ma'am.
Great. Okay. So a very good evening to all of you. I'm very, very happy to be here. I want to thank Dr. Anita Tagore for reaching out to me, for Sanskriti to be remaining in touch with me and giving me this chance to share my thoughts with all of you. As you all know, I'll be speaking on the theme gender and the Constitution. But before I start, let us first reflect on a more foundational question. What is the Constitution? What is Constitution of a country? संविधान होता क्या है? क्या मतलब है संविधान का? Generally, we think that Constitution is a set of principles of governance for a country. It is gender neutral, it is post-ideological, and so on and so forth. But actually, Constitution is a document which is normative and it is prescriptive. That is, it tells us what is the norm, what is the good thing, what is the right thing to do in governing a country and its people. It is a document which is not value neutral, it is never value neutral. Rather, it contains a set of values which are encoded in it, and through it they pass on to, or they should pass into the laws of the country, and aspirationally even into the conduct of its citizens. We all should live according to constitutional values, even though the reality of caste atrocities, gender-based violence, labor exploitation, religious violence, communalism, all of this tells us that more often than not, we do not live by the Constitution. We do not care about the Constitution. The constitutional values, which I'll be talking about more in the course of this talk, are not frozen in time. They're never static. These values change, and they need to change with time to recognize voices which were previously unheard or repressed, and to include those who were excluded or easily forgotten. And this can only happen when we all read the Constitution, irrespective of what your disciplinary orientation is. No matter what you're studying, it is important for all of us to read the Constitution, to try to understand what it says and where it is silent, and how we can work to fill that silence. This work is not just the work of judges or lawyers or those who study law. It is the duty of all its citizens. In fact, I'm sure you all remember from your social sciences classes, from your civics classes, that the first fundamental duty of every citizen is to abide by the Constitution and respect its ideals and its institutions. ये मूल कर्तव्य है हमारा. भारत के प्रत्येक नागरिक का यह कर्तव्य होगा कि वह संविधान का पालन करे और उसके आदर्शों, उसकी संस्थाओं का आदर करें. So for this, it is important for us to engage with constitutional discourses as well. We need to pay attention to constitutional interpretation. संविधान की व्याख्या पर ध्यान देना बहुत जरूरी है. We need to ask, and we really need to reflect on it, whether the Constitution is being interpreted through progressive values, or is it acquiring a shape of regressive and constraining value systems which should worry everyone around us, especially the feminists? Is it being interpreted keeping in mind those whose alleviation of suffering should be at the center, the most disadvantaged, most marginalized of our society? Or is the Constitution being interpreted to secure and protect the interests of the ruling class? The Constitution can tilt either ways. It really depends on how we are molding this very malleable document with very, very firm roots in our in our history, in our past, and that past has not been a past free of violence. We have to remember this. So, संविधान की व्याख्या पर ध्यान देना, as I was saying, is very, very important. Similarly, when it comes to the question of gender, or what has come to be called gender justice, again, we need to critically read and examine how the Constitution and its provisions have been interpreted. As Dr. Anita already told us, in the beginning, that it definitely contains formal equality provisions. How are we reading those formal equality provisions after 70 years of the enactment of the Constitution? Okay, is it keeping pace with the feminist movement? Does it align with the goals of the feminist movement or not? Is an inquiry that we all ought to do in our everyday life. What ideological structures and institutions are being dismantled, and which ones are strengthened through constitutional interpretations? Okay, all these questions are questions which are very, very important, which should be very, very important for any critical mind in the contemporary times. So, to start with, let me remind you that when the Constitution of India was enacted in 1950, gender as a concept, the way we understand it today, gender versus sex, and how gender is about male and female attributes and characteristics, and how they acquired through socialization, this concept, and this expression gender was not a part of the feminist vocabulary. In fact, Simone de Beauvoir, when she wrote The Second Sex, which was first published in 1949, she did not use the word gender even once, right? Though the famous line from that book, one is not born a woman, one becomes one. एक महिला पैदा नहीं होती, बल्कि एक महिला बन जाती है. This is what it means. This line does capture the essence of what came to mean gender in 1960s, when the second wave feminists started insisting on the distinction between sex and gender. I'm not going into it, but I'm sure either you have studied it or you will study it during the course of your graduation. This very, very important distinction, which actually became central to second wave feminism. Okay, and this is gender as a term we know was first coined in 1968 by Robert Stroller, who was a psychoanalyst. He had nothing to do with feminism, but it was the feminists who actually turned the concept around, right? So, but when the Constitution was enacted, this term did not exist in the way we understand it today. So when we look at the Constitution today, when we have entered the fourth wave of feminism, #feminism, and the concept of gender is no longer confined to heterosexual binary of man and women, right? I mean, we know there are multiple genders. There are people who do not align with gender, so there's a whole, the discourse has totally taken a different trajectory from how we understood it in 1960s and 70s. At this time, when we are reading the Constitution, we need to be very careful and sensitive readers to avoid anachronistic interpretations. We cannot just stay with what the document looked like in 1950. और ये बहुत ज़रूरी बात इसलिए है, especially if we look at it, and I would urge you people to go back to the debates that happened around the recently enacted law on transgenders. Okay, and you must have read in newspapers, on several blogs, and in social media how, at the time when the initial bill was floated in the parliament, there was total lack of clarity even on the definition, the very definition of transgender. किसी को कुछ पता ही नहीं था. So lawmakers did not know what is the meaning of transgender, and they wanted to make a law in it. Right? This was hugely debated. It was, extensively critiqued, and some changes happened, and now we have a law which is, I mean, okay, we can have a different session perhaps on that law some other time, that how it again is full of problems, but that's not the part of what I'm going to say today. But the point basically is that unless and until we understand, and here by we, I mean lawyers largely, okay? I mean, I'm trained in law. Unless and until lawyers, judges, lawmakers understand gender as a concept, okay? They actually enter into what it, what it entails today. No meaningful legal reform would be able to take place. And that is why a very important conversation is required today between students of social sciences, students of humanities, students of, and students of law. Okay, and otherwise, we will keep going round in circles. So social sciences and feminists have to work together, with the legal discipline, so that we can actually take it somewhere. Okay, so in that sense, I want to clarify at the very outset that because I'm trained in law, and though I have though I'm very critical, you would notice, in the rest of the talk about law as a discipline, I think it is imbued with violence, but I also firmly believe that we necessarily have to engage with law as, not just because it is a tool of social transformation, but also it is a discursive real. It can change. Sanskriti was talking about that हमें सोच बदलनी होगी. So, it is a discursive site which can actually lead to changes in people's attitudes. सोच change हो सकती है if laws on the ground, become more nuanced. They actually start speaking to the realities of people's lives. They start speaking to suffering subjects, right? So that's why I'm starting with this talk with this hope that all the students, who are a part of this program today would take this discourse seriously and engage with it, not in some uncritical fashion, but in a critical fashion, to see what are its loopholes and what we can do with it, right? If we really want to believe if we want to really transform the reality around us, if at all that is possible. So on the face of it, if we read the Constitution, and if we read it literally, we'll see that the Constitution is a liberal document which only carries the vision of the first wave of feminism. And you know what the first wave of feminism was about, early 20th century, which was about equality-based rights. Okay, so you will see that Part 3 of the Constitution, which talks about fundamental rights, talks about equality-based rights. Article 14, which provides right to equality to all persons. Article 15, subclause 1, which prohibits any discrimination on the basis of sex. 15, subclause 3, which provides that state may make special provisions in favor of women. So Article 39, 51A, Articles 243D, 243T, which were included in 1991, which provide for reservation for women in the lower levels of governance, and so on and so forth, right? So there are a range of rights which seem to be furthering the formal equality discourse. But we cannot remain confined to the discourse of rights of women when reading and interpreting the Constitution today. In reading the Constitution, our task, I will argue, is to step outside the constricted meaning of gender, which will only make us focus on provisions about men or women. Okay, that idea of gender is something that we have to leave behind. Instead, following the most fundamental and precious lesson of the third wave of feminism, through people like feminists, Indian feminists like Sudesh Ved, Kumkum Sangari, in their absolutely fantastic introduction to the book Recasting Women. And I would urge all the students who are here, if you have read it, great. If you haven't read this, please procure a copy of this book and read the essays and definitely the introduction to this book, which is by Sudesh Ved and Kumkum Sangari, where they tell us that all reality is gender. Gender cannot just be restricted to masculine or feminine attributes, which get attached to the two sexes. In fact, rather, everything around us is gendered. So we really need to critically analyze the so-called gender-neutral concepts which are entrenched in laws, in the Constitution, and also when you witness the world around you. Concepts like justice, sovereignty, nation, secularism, privacy, all these concepts are gendered concepts, even though they're not explicitly talking about some kind of femininity or masculinity. Okay, so this kind of idea of gender is something that is pertinent, and that we need to work with it to make, to actually give meaningful interpretations to the Constitution. So what I'm going to do now is I'll attempt to look at the Constitution from a feminist perspective, keeping in mind the insights of the third wave of feminism, and focus on some cases, some old, some new, where, and in all these cases, the common theme was that gender was a central concern. As I mentioned, Article 15(1) of the Constitution, which states that states shall not discriminate only on the grounds of sex. This non-discrimination clause is in the first few decades of the independence. This non-discrimination clause was very, very narrowly interpreted, okay, in such a way that it ended up, though it was meant to protect women, though, there was this special provision could be enacted for women, but actually the non-discrimination clause produced anti-women decisions. And I would explain this using a 1974 decision of Punjab and Haryana High Court. It is called Sucha Singh Bajwa and Sadhu Singh Bajwa versus State of Punjab. What happened in this case, it is one case out of hundreds. Okay, and I'm picking this, quite randomly to explain how everything about how the Constitution, which was supposed to protect women's rights, actually ended up subverting them. So what happened in this case? In this case, a particular law, which was called Punjab Land Reforms Act, one section of that law was challenged as unconstitutional. The petitioner says that Section 5 violates Article 15 because it discriminates against women. What did this section do? This section allowed that the holder of a land could select separate permissible area in respect of adult sons. So basically, a part of the land could be given to adult sons, but not to the adult daughters. Okay, so the land could not be transferred to adult daughters. This is what the section clearly allowed. The court, Punjab and Haryana High Court, while looking at this particular provision, said that this section makes a distinction, which is, obviously it makes a distinction between adult boys and adult girls, but this distinction is not based on sex alone. Okay, and they said there is another basis to that distinction. There's another reason behind this distinction that is made between adult daughters and adult sons. And what is that reason? The reason is that a daughter has to get married and go to another family after her marriage in due course. Right? That is why, because a marriage is going to uproot the daughter and take her and make her a part of someone else's family, that is why this distinction is valid. Okay, so it's not really based on mere sex. Okay, they thought that the section is valid and it was upheld. Now, what did the court actually do here? Here, the court, I'm sure you all have guessed it by now, you're all really smart, that the court, rather than challenging the socially and culturally constructed gender roles of men and women, reinforced them. Okay, so they did not challenge the idea that why should mere marriage of a daughter alienate her from her rights in the land or in the property. right? This idea was not challenged, rather it was furthered, it was supported, it was reinforced. Interestingly, also note that in doing so, the court used the trope of difference feminism. That see, men and women are different. What does difference feminism say? That the men and women are different, and that is why they should be treated differently. Okay, or it makes sense, right? We can't say that everyone, all human beings, should be denied maternity leave. This would not make sense, because it is women who give birth, okay, and that is why biologically they are the ones who would be off work for some time, and they are the ones who require maternity leave. Okay, so we cannot actually have formal equality between men and women everywhere, and difference feminism actually spells it out, makes it clear. But in this particular case, the court is recognizing the difference between men and women, okay, to actually wipe away women's rights, okay? And this difference that they recognize is a culturally and socially constructed difference, rather to basically, or simply put, it is a gender-based distinction which is recognized, and that is why the court ends up supporting a very, very problematic provision which stood as a part of the law for a very, very long time, as late as 2005. Right? So, and they did so while saying that Constitution sanctions it. Right? This case is not a standalone case. There are a range of cases under the Equality Clause, under Article 14, under Article 15, Subclause 1, in which courts have relied on stereotypes about women, which were used as justification for differential treatment. And in doing so, the court never bothered actually to go into any real analysis of disadvantage, or never bothered to explore the extent to which these stereotypical roles which women have to conform to as wives, as mothers, they end up reinforcing women's inequality, they end up strengthening patriarchy. Again, those of you who are interested in exploring this dimension further, I would urge you to look at another landmark text by Ratna Kapoor and Brenda Kosman. It is a 1995 book. It is called Subversive Sites. Okay, and I would really, really urge you people to look at it, because in this book, both Kapoor and Kosman have shown that stereotypical gender norms not only affect bad decisions like this one, which I shared with you, but even progressive decisions which seem to be upholding women's rights end up reinforcing stereotypes, okay? So law may be reproducing the dominant normative sexual framework in and through rights discourse. They might be advancing. What am I saying? That law might be advancing rights, but while advancing rights, it might be also strengthening the normative structure, which is conservative, which is rooted in sexual morality, which is rooted in patriarchy, right? So we cannot. So in other words, सिर्फ ज़्यादा अधिकार होना, ज़्यादा rights होना necessarily would not give us freedom. हम स्वच्छंद नहीं हो जाएंगे rights होने से, अधिकार होने से. So we have to make a distinction between the language of rights and freedom. Okay, in a very recent book, Ratna Kapoor says that in her critique of the rights discourse, she basically says rights actually confine freedom in a fishbowl. Okay, we have to find freedom outside the language of rights, because sometimes when we only insist on rights, we actually lose sight of the fact that we are also reinforcing conservative sexual morality. We are also, upholding dominant normative framework on which social mores are founded. Okay. So this is an idea that I would want you people to, think about, reflect on, because Constitution only talks in the language of rights. Okay, but we also, as feminists, we constantly have to interrogate whether rights are securing our freedom. Okay, whether more rights necessarily means having more freedom. And many feminists like Ratna Kapoor and various others, Wendy Brown, in fact, even Gayatri Spivak have challenged the rights discourse, in these terms. So what I'm saying is simply this, that even when rights are granted to women, legal exemptions are granted to women, it may not always result in substantive equality. And very often, institutions which seek to maintain networks of gendered power, and what are those institutions? Okay, let's quickly revise that: family, marriage, nation, community. Okay, on which all the ideologies of the present are based: wifehood, motherhood, daughterhood, right? Or this is how the network of gendered power operates. If constitutional discourse is not challenging these networks of gendered power, it is doing little to bring about changes in realities, in the lived realities of men, women, and other groups. With this, I want to move on to another case which should be of interest to Delhi University students. It's something that I always want to share with my students. It is Vandana Kandari's case, and it is a decision which was delivered by the Delhi High Court in 2010. What happened in this case? In this case, petitioners were students of law faculty, Delhi University, and these students who went to the court were actually those who were detained from appearing in semester examination because they had attendance shortfall. Now, I really don't know what are the norms of attendance in Kalindi College, okay, but there was a time when norms of attendance in Delhi University were very, very strict, right? Like when I was a student there, okay, and we used to be detained if we didn't have the benchmark, right? Even in ILI, they're very strict, and our students definitely don't like it. So I don't know what is the experience of you all. But these students went to the court, right? Because they were detained, they had short attendance, and they couldn't, they were said that you can't appear for semester exams, okay? And the reasons for absence they pleaded were manifold, okay? Some of them said that we had severe illness, medical grounds. Two girls were in the advanced stage of their pregnancy. They were basically pregnant. I don't know at what stage, but they were pregnant. And two of the petitioners argued that they had caregivers' responsibilities. They had aged grandparents at home, and they had to look after them, and that's why they could not attend morning classes and so on and so forth. Now, what did the court do, Delhi High Court? The court came down very heavily on the students and denied relief to all of them. Okay, so the caregivers, people who were ill, all of them were denied relief except the two female students who were absent because of their pregnancy. Okay, so these girls were given relief. They were allowed to, even though they had very poor attendance, they were allowed to sit for the semester exam. Now, on the first glance, it appears that, the court actually relied on Article 15, subclause 3, right? Special provision for women, they can't be disadvantaged because, they were carrying, they were pregnant and so on, right? So it can appear like that. It can appear to be a case which should please women. But if we look closely, okay, and I would want you people to look closely, please have a look at this judgment, please read it. It definitely is of interest to all the women. But when you look at it closely, you will see that the underlying assumptions of the court, based on which it came to the conclusion that it did, those assumptions were premised on what Kapoor and Kosman call familial ideology in their book Subversive Sites. Okay, and what do they mean by familial ideology? It is they say that familial ideology is the dominant idea of family as an institution, through which the dominant conceptions about family, dominant ideas about what the family is and what kind of roles people play within family. Okay, and all these roles and this idea is universalized. It is same across, it is universal in all, countries. You'll find this in all cultures, and it is naturalized, as if the roles that we are required to play in family, they're natural roles. They are not, they're innate to the people who are playing these roles. So what I'm saying is, if you will look at this judgment closely, okay, read it closely, you'll see that every judgment has an underlying ideology, underlying assumption. The underlying assumption of this judgment is that it has to safeguard the institution of family. Okay, it is working in and through familial ideology. And I'll read certain parts from the decision. Okay, there's some quotes from the decision. The court says, and I quote, "To become a mother is the most natural phenomenon in the life of a woman." End of quote. Another quote, "Of all the rights of women, to be the mother is the greatest." End of quote. Okay, to be the mother is the greatest of all the rights. All those women who are, who are not mothers should really cringe at this fact, right? So, and then the court goes on to say, therefore, the court thought that, again, I'm quoting, "By not granting these two students relaxation, we will be making motherhood a crime, which no civilized democracy in the history of mankind has ever done or will ever do. We cannot make them pay the price for the glory that is motherhood." End of quote. So this celebration of motherhood, okay, and not the fact that perhaps, not the empirical reality, perhaps these women were having morning sickness or whatever, none of that, right? But the celebration of motherhood itself by the judge, which becomes the rationale for exemption from the attendance rules, is pertinent, and it should worry us actually. The Constitution, because the constitutional provision of equality here became a tool to protect and promote the ideology of family, which has pre-assigned and culturally marked roles. The court is not questioning those roles. Okay, the court is for the court, it was actually absolutely simply natural that women will become, mothers, and they will miss classes, and this is their fate, and that's why we have to be good, right? And we have to support them, because motherhood is great. So women are given rights because they become mothers and not because of anything else. The dominant notion of family here is based on a set of ideas about pre-assigned roles and responsibilities, primarily on the basis of their gender. Fathers, mothers, daughters, sons, daughters-in-law, sons-in-law they all have their very well-defined roles, and they're all expected to, what Butler would say, and in Indian context, we all are expected to perform our gender through these roles. Don't we all perform our gender in the most important rituals and ceremonies that take place every day in our family, right? We're all performing our gender in the lavish weddings, the kind of attire you wear, how you walk, what you act, what kind of music is played, and so on. And so it's all pre-assigned, fixed, culturally demarcated, right? So there's a sexual division of material as well as emotional labor in the family, okay? And the court doesn't challenge it, it accepts it, reinforces it, okay? Entrenches it into the judicial discourse. It becomes a part of the law. This sentimentality about the motherhood, which is a part of the division of labor, where women disproportionately bear the burden of raising the child, is in a way culturally celebrated in this particular judgment. And also contrast this with the fact that some other students who went to the court had very important caregiving responsibilities, right? So, they had ailing grandparents, and they did not have any other support system. This caregiving responsibility was not acknowledged. Okay, while care, for a potential mother was something that was glorified. Okay, so it should also make us ask, what are our ethics of care? Are our ethics of care also constrained and determined by the dominant ideological frameworks which align with the interest of Brahmanical patriarchy, if I can put it like that. The same thing is true for legislations and policies which are made to benefit women. Okay, and that's why it's important for us to really read why a particular law is made. Okay, we cannot proliferation of laws. बहुत सारे laws बन रहे हैं, बहुत सारे, जब भी कुछ, after the Delhi gang rape, what happened? Okay, let's change the law. Let's make more laws. Okay, is it necessarily a good thing? Is something that we really have to reflect on. Okay, because most of the laws that are enacted, उनका जो underlying logic होता है, उनकी जो assumptions होती है, उनका जो objective होता है, aim होता है, goals of these laws is very, very problematic. Okay, it is protectionist. It is couched in protectionist terms कि हमें अपनी औरतों को बचाना है. Okay, हमें किससे बचाना है किसी को नहीं पता, right? But हमें अपनी औरतों को बचाना है और इसलिए हम उनको बहुत और laws बनाएंगे उनके लिए. Okay, and that's why we really have to know why a particular law is being made, with which objective, what is the goal of that particular. Let me take a very, very simple example that should resonate with all of you, which is about reservation in public transport, which is just being turned into a joke by the present Delhi government, right? But anyway, coming back to the specific reservation of seats in public transport for women. Okay, and there has been a debate, long-standing debate around it, that why this kind of reservation should be done for women. Is it because women are weaker than men? Because if we actually align with this, okay, women are weaker, then we are, actually endorsing some kind of biologically deterministic reason कि यार औरतें तो कमजोर होती हैं तो फिर तो हमेशा ही कमजोर रहेंगी, then तो we are doomed, as women we are doomed forever. Okay, so this kind of logic, if it is advanced, that because women are biologically weaker, that is why they need, reservation in public transport, is something that should again, irk us. Okay, because it fixes women into their biology, which we would never be able to escape. Okay, just by virtue of being women, all women become weak. In contrast to it, can be a gender-sensitive reasoning for reservation clause, which could be of this nature, that women historically have been excluded from public spaces for social and cultural reasons. They face discrimination and even harassment, including sexual harassment in public spaces, and therefore they need reservation in public transport, not because they are weak, but because of a historical and cultural disadvantage that they experience, and because we need to correct this historical and cultural disadvantage that they experience, we need reservation. Not because of their weakness or biology, but because of the social and cultural disadvantage they experience. So basically, we need to shift from what are known as protectionist arguments, कि बचाएंगे हम उनको बचाने के लिए because ये अबला नारी है. Okay, that's not the point, right? We need to shift away from these protectionist arguments to justice-based arguments. Okay, and okay, justice-based arguments which take history, which take historical justice into account, which take cultural injustice into account, cultural inequality, the way it is experienced by different genders into account. And this remains true for affirmative action in general, for reservations of backward classes, is also a matter of justice and not state protectionism. Okay, and this has to be understood in these terms, right? That it's neither charity, it's neither, state protectionism, but a matter of justice. And that is how affirmative action needs to be understood, because there's such a backlash, against reservations in public universities for backward classes and so on and so forth. So we really, really need to understand that it is imperative for us to create provisions which are affirmative action provisions, because the injustice around us has been created by our social mores, right? So anyway, what is the larger point that I'm trying to make? Sanskriti, will you, I don't know, I am not able to keep tab on time. Can you tell me how much time do I have?
Maybe another 10 minutes, Latika.
Okay. So I'm going to rush through. I have become terribly slow. Okay, so I'm going to rush through.
If you want little more time, we are willing to give you. We are all here to listen to you. So it's going on fine. If you want 20 minutes, it's also fine with us.
No, but I really want good discussion. So I will just try to make the main points. There's one case that I definitely want to share with you people. But yes, so thank you. I think I'll be 10 minutes would be good. So what is the point that I was trying to make? The Constitution is not already a feminist or an anti-feminist text. It's not like that, okay? So there are political scientists, feminist political scientists like Nivedita Menon, who would take a position that law is always embedded in violence, and justice is beyond violence, okay? That is one kind of position. The other kind of position is a liberal position, which says that, okay, see, so many laws, so many rights, we have a great constitution, so theek hai, sab theek ho jayega, okay? I would urge you people to move beyond both these positions, okay? To not uncritically endorse, or engage with law, but also not to abandon law or constitution as a site in which, where we have to struggle, right? So, and for this requires us to spend large interpretive labor, okay, if we really want to make feminist, a constitution a feminist text, okay? I mean, it really requires a labor of love, if I can put it like that, from our end. And this can't happen until legal interpretation challenges stereotypical gender norms, and law understands special provisions of women in terms of substantive equality, substantive justice, corrective justice, okay? It takes historical injustice into account. And this is really hard work, as I said, okay? And for this, feminists, we need to keep a critical eye on the direction in which the Constitution is evolving, the meaning that its words are acquiring, the context in which judicial interpretations are taking place. For example, today when many women activists from Sudha Bhardwaj, Natasha Narwal, Devangana Kalita, Disha Ravi, they have been arrested under draconian laws that may not stand the test of constitutional validity. Please read the writings of Gautam Bhatia around it. When our polity is numbed by unlawful arrests of those who have the courage to speak truth to power, we certainly need to closely watch and analyze what the Indian judiciary is doing to protect and guarantee the rights of its citizens. Is it feminist theory and practice, or is it majoritarian right-wing anti-feminist approaches that are swaying the Constitution? Or more problematically, are they both bound up together like a Mobius strip, as if we don't know where our freedom ends and where oppression begins? We don't seem to know this, okay? And this requires us not to do much, okay? It requires us first and foremost to read, and to read closely, okay? Because we need to understand the contradictions and aporias that are at the heart of law and constitution. And finally, let me just, I'll just keep updating. We can talk when if you guys have questions. But let me take you to the year 2018, which was a very, very important year from the perspective of gender, and especially as far as the rights of women are concerned, because in 2018, a series of judgments were delivered by the Supreme Court, and they were widely reported in media as well, which actually were about right of women to practice religion, the Sabrimala case, decriminalization of homosexuality, then adultery, decriminalization of adultery, to protection of interfaith marriages. And on all these cases, the court sought to transform the dominant understandings of social and structural institutions that shape our gendered selves. Most of these cases run into several hundred pages, and they do make a delightful reading for some feminists, inundated as they are with feminist ideas, feminist scholarship. But again, we need to read closely to see what actually is going on. On the face of it, it might appear as if feminism has finally made inroads into the Supreme Court, both in terms of language as well as reasoning. But let's see, what kind of feminism is actually this, okay? And I will just talk about one case from 2018. This is called Joseph Shine versus Union of India, in which the Supreme Court declared the adultery provision in the Indian Penal Code, which was section 497 of the Indian Penal Code was declared as unconstitutional. You all must have read about this case in the newspaper. It was widely reported, celebrated, and so on. In fact, it was hailed as a historic decision from the perspective of women's rights, which I must add, it is. It's a very, very important decision. The 5-judge bench of the court in this case overruled a earlier decision called Somitri Vishnu, where the provision was upheld on the touchstone of Article 14 and 15. So what was the adultery clause? Adultery clause basically said a man whose wife has sexual intercourse with someone else, this person, this man, this husband can actually charge that the other man, the paramour of the wife, under section 497. Okay, so the paramour of the wife, the lover of the wife, was criminalized under section 497. Okay, and the husband had a cause of action against him. For the longest time, feminists challenged this provision. Okay, and the feminist challenge was on many grounds. The two important grounds were, firstly, the wife did not have a corresponding claim against an adulterous husband. Okay, so the wife could not take the husband's lover to the court under this provision. And number two, which was a more subtle thing, that here the cause of action actually arose because the husband was seen to be the one who was violated. Okay, and the argument essentially was here the wife, the woman, is reduced to a property whose property rights as if are violated by a third party, in the marriage, and that is why the owner of that property, which is i.e. the husband, has a claim against the third party. Okay, so the woman herself had no say at all. Okay, and that is why it was challenged again and again, was widely critiqued by Indian feminists. Right now, Joseph Shine's case is important because the court unanimously, all the 5 judges agreed that this section is unconstitutional. Okay, but they differed in their constitutional reasoning, as well as the scope of rights they relied on in order to arrive at their respective decisions. Okay, I don't have time to actually go into what each judge said, okay, but I only talk about the judgment which was delivered by Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, and I'm talking about this particular judgment only because this has been celebrated as a feminist judgment. Okay, in fact, in a conference where Justice Chandrachud spoke just a month or so after writing this judgment, he said, "Constitution is a feminist text." Okay, and that's why we should be very interested in seeing what this judge is seeing. As feminists, we should be very interested in all the decisions that he's writing, because he sees this he sees constitution as feminist, and he definitely relies a lot on feminist literature. So if you read his judgment, you'll see he has quoted every possible feminist that one can think of, starting from Nivedita Menon, Pratiksha Bakshi, Gayatri Spivak, Eve Sedgwick, you name it, and that person is there. Of course, not paying attention to the internal contradictions and internal contestations within feminism, right? I mean, so it's just sprinkled, everywhere. Feminism as if it's just like, everywhere, without really seeing that one feminist, for example, having Catherine McKinnon and Ratna Kapoor on the same page, okay, to make the same argument should be like, oh my God, like what are we doing? We should cringe, right? But that is what is happening in this particular case, right? So anyway, you should definitely read it. It's a delightful read. What happens then? Referring to a long-standing feminist work on the issue of adultery, Justice Chandrachud recognized that the adultery provision, section 497, was based on sexual stereotypes that women are passive and devoid of sexual agency. Okay, And he also goes on to say that the provision fails to recognize them as equally autonomous individuals in society. I should also, give you one thing that in 1987, when in Saumitri Vishnu's case, when the adultery provision was upheld as constitutionally valid, it was Justice Chandrachud's father, the senior Chandrachud, who wrote the judgment. Okay, and he was the one who basically said that women can never be seducers. Okay, and that is why they cannot, they should never be criminalized under the adultery clause. Okay, so the son here is going absolutely the other way around, which is a good thing, right? Because the father has been berated a lot by Indian feminists after that particular decision, okay, saying that women can't be seducers. Oh my God, what was that? But anyway, so Justice Chandrachud Jr. has corrected it. What does he find? But what does he further say? He relies on a 2015 decision from South Korean constitutional law, apart from various other jurisdictions, various other cases. And I'm just picking certain things, because I have to quickly make the point that I want to make. And he says, relying on South African Constitutional Court decision on adultery, and he quotes from there. This is para 27 of his judgment. And the quote is, love and sexual life were intimate concerns and they should not be made subject to criminal law. Love and sexual life should not be made subject to criminal law. Further, he couches adultery within the right to marital choice, falling into the domain of protective private choices, even though it may be an unpopular choice, he says. So he says within marriage, within marital choices, adultery is one of the choices, and it is a protected private choice, even though it can be unpopular, even though you might not like it, even though it may not be regular. Thus, private protections afforded to marriage must extend to all choices made within marriage. This is what he says on para number 29, which obviously include even choice to be adulterous. What we notice in this judgment is that he makes an interpretive leap, okay, an interpretive jump from adultery law. And what is that jump? So that he starts by talking about adultery love as a violation of equality and dignity, and then he goes on to talk about adultery as a constitutionally protected marital choice, which should be protected by freedom of association, and action which is protected by sexual privacy. Para 29 again. Okay. Now, this interpretive jump that I'm talking about needs critical engagement and serious thought from our side, because it appears that the judge is extending his critique of the adultery provision to the very institution of marriage, based as it is on monogamy and exclusivity. There is recognition of new kinds of marriages where sexual fidelity and monogamy are not the normative foundation. He says this in the judgment. But we are left wondering if he's suggesting that the dominant conception and the institution of marriage itself is against constitutional morality. So let me explain what I'm trying to say through all these quotes. Justice Chandrachud relies on the idea of right to bodily integrity, right to sexual privacy, okay, and sexual privacy of being adulterous within marriage, okay. And then he said all of this is protected. This is all constitutionally protected, and that is why Section 497 is a problem, okay. In the same, breath, he also says that there are different kinds of marriages. Not all marriages are about monogamy, and so on and so forth, right? So on one hand, we see that he's relying on sex-positive feminist reasoning, right to bodily integrity, right to your sexuality, and so on. So even though as I said earlier, he falls back on Kathleen McKinnon's sex-negative position to critique family and heterosexual marriage. Okay, so it's all I don't know. It's you have to just pick anything you want from it. Okay, so he does that, and then but while talking about sex-positive feminist reasoning, he foregrounds sexuality rights of all women. Okay. And what I'm saying is, if we take this seriously, then the logical corollary of his interpretation is that marriage in its current form itself is unconstitutional. And this may be great. This is amazing, right? This is going to be the most radical feminist move, okay, which even Indian feminists have been only tentative about, and I think we should all go out about it. Marriage is an oppressive institution, okay? And let's say what it is, right? And one wonders whether the judge is saying that, but unfortunately, okay, let's come back on the ground again. The judge does not go that far and gets caught in the contradictions on account of what I have called judicial verbosity. इतना सब कुछ बोल दिया, हर feminist की बात कर दी, हर feminist position को ले आए, तो अभी कुछ नहीं समझ आया कि क्या हुआ, okay? So the only thing that and again, I'm saying it is an important judgment. It is a judgment that needs to be celebrated, okay? Because we have got rid of this very oppressive, archaic law that was in place. But the mode of doing this, the mode of arriving at this conclusion, even though there was hand-holding done by via feminist texts, via feminist positions, is only creating, is not giving us any clarity. So we are, on the one hand, we are invited to celebrate human sexuality and consensual intimacies without any fetters, which is great, okay? But on the other hand, the judge reiterates Puttaswamy's case, Puttaswamy, which is a famous right to privacy case, okay, that all of us have fundamental right to privacy, and he extends privacy to, and I quote from paragraph 57 of the judgment now, he says, right to privacy extends to sanctity of marriage, the liberty of procreation, the choice of a family life. Now, how do we reconcile these contradictory formations? Because if right to privacy extends to marriage, okay, then marriage as an institution also has to be protected when the judge is not going that far. Then how do we make sense of adultery within, adulterous, relations within marriage? Isn't marriage as it is in its current form, which is heterosexual and monogamous, in itself an infringement of freedom of human sexuality? I mean, one should say that it is. Aren't sexual intimacies encroached upon and restricted when one agrees to be a part of the institution of marriage? Of course they are, because marriage is monogamous. So we restrict our consensual intimacies the moment we enter the institution of marriage. So simply put, and I wonder if I'm able to really get across my point, but what I'm trying to say is this, that the judicial reasoning behind the declaration of adultery as unconstitutional ends up becoming unsustainable unless we also understand the judgment as simultaneously suggesting that marriage hereon must be understood in non-monogamous terms. Okay, because what was really important for the judge, that the judge should have entered into criminal law concepts like criminalization, like what is criminal harm, okay, when can a wrong be called a criminal wrong, and what is a wrong which is perhaps a social wrong, okay, or a civil wrong, but not a criminal wrong, right? And maybe the court should have stopped, this particular judge should have stopped there, okay, rather than extending and entering into other domains. Because this kind of rhetorical feminism, this is rhetorical feminism of judicial political correctness. कि हमको सब कुछ ठीक-ठाक बोलना है, okay, political correctness, simultaneously and with equal zeal protects sexual autonomy of individuals on the one hand and the conservative ideologies of marriage and family on the other, because you extend right to privacy to family, to the institution of family as well as marriage. In fact, these institutions have been protected under UDHR, okay? They have that kind of sanction, okay? So we need to think about these contradictions in these very important judgment. Okay, this is a very, very important judgment, but it is contradictory, because unless we think about these contradictions, we would remain feminists in discourse and not necessarily in terms of the structures of our own individual and collective desires, our own psychic investments in oppressive institutions. Okay, we as feminists would never be able to actually question our psychic investment in our desire, the nature of our desire, for those institutions, for those structures which continue to reproduce inequality and exploitation. The last point, and I will just take 3 minutes now. The last point that I want to make is that legal and constitutional concepts which appear neutral need to be examined from the lens of gender and the way gender is understood after the third wave of feminism. We just discussed how right to equality needs to be critically investigated from the lens of gender. The same is true for other constitutional categories like federalism, nation, citizenship, social justice, reservation policy in higher education and employment, common good, an expression used in part 4. All these ideas, the idea of common good is a gendered idea. Okay, and we really need to unpack it to see what it really stands for. We should start. Perhaps we should start by asking, because we are living in the age of hyper nationalism, that isn't the idea of nation based as it is on masculine and feminine imagination, sacrificing mothers, sisters, and wives who send the men to battlefield, without flinching and without batting an eyelid. Is there any constitution, or for that matter, is there any country which contests this gendered imagination of the nation? Most armed forces are male forces, and now women also want to join these forces to feel equal. Okay, is this equality? Equality to take arms to kill the enemy? Is this a part of feminist imagination of the world? Are borders a part of the feminist imagination of the world, or the feminist imagination would take us to a borderless world? Or take the idea of citizenship. Who is a rightful citizen who's entitled to protection within the domain of the Constitution? Are sex workers included within the fold of citizenship? Are Dalit women who are raped by upper caste men in their villages and their FIRs are not lodged by the police, are they included within the fold of citizenship? Isn't citizenship itself based on the violent notion of outlawing the outsiders, the migrants, the immigrants, the refugees? And we saw it, how it played out in the last couple of years. Is this a feminist idea of citizenship? So the point basically is, if we remain blind to gender and accept legal categories as neutral, as all-inclusive, we may end up reading and understanding constitutional law in a formal manner. Again, I'm going back to what Dr. Anita Tagore said in the beginning, which does not capture or speak to the realities of our lives of men, women, homosexual, minority groups, subaltern sections. So that's all I want to say. To conclude, I just want to say that as people who are interested in issues of justice and equality, we need to constantly engage with groups on the ground and be attentive to their voices before we actually bring about changes in law and interpretations in law, because that's not going to help us at all. Those interpretations and those changes, those reforms are just going to backfire. And I think with this, I end. I'm so sorry. I think I've exceeded the 10 minutes that I bargained for.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was very, very, very informative to hear you today. I would request people, the audience, to kindly write down their questions in the chat box.
So let me begin, Latika.
Yes.
A very interesting, presentation, I must say, because that's also that's also the kind of work which many of us from the political science department actually engage in, And being a very young scholar that I can see you to be, I think it's like quantum leap that you have taken. In fact, what I was interested to know is, while you're making an argument, from say, a shift from the protectionist to the idea of justice, I think it's also important for us to understand that gender does not exist in a vacuum. So there has to be, we have to kind of understand the kind of pragmatic intersectionalities that are there between gender, caste, and class. I think many of us, when we work, say, on the idea of law. In fact, you'll be surprised to know that I did my law from the faculty after I finished my PhD. Because I was sitting in the courts throughout the day, and my work is on property rights, and I was sitting in the courts throughout the day without understanding the vantage point of the way the judges were arguing, because I was making an extremely political argument, you see. So it's important for us, when as feminists, who are working in the discourse of law, say looking at judgments and looking at how the legal system is actually kind of, trying to bridge the gap that is there between, say, formal guarantees by the constitution and the substantive inequalities that are like massively expansive. I think it's also important for us to bring in the intersectionalities,
Absolutely.
that is there.
Yes, yes,
That
yes.
is there. I think that's an important point which many of us kind of,
Forget. Yes.
forget. Many
Yeah,
of us
yeah,
kind of,
yes.
forget. That's one. The second is, I'm really interested to know, your take on, say, on the transgender bill, which you mentioned very, you did mention about it, but, I will be really interested, if you can just tell us a little bit, about, this entire transgender bill. And today you must be knowing that many of the states actually they have transgender boards. Unfortunately, our Delhi government doesn't have one, but they have these transgender welfare board. And I wrote a paper on the Kerala transgender board and the kind of work which they are doing, So maybe you could, kind of give us a little more understanding about the law bit, on the transgender bill. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So, Sanskriti, how do we go about it? Do we take a couple of questions or?
No, I think you can proceed with the transgender bill thing, and till then people would raise
Okay.
it.
Okay, great. Can you just give me a second? I need to shift my position. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, thank you so much, Anita, for those questions. This is, I totally agree with you that it would be very problematic if we set out to think that gender is the primary contradiction, the way some classical Marxists think of class, that class is the primary contradiction. I think we have to just get out of that frame completely, because an intersectionality definitely becomes a conceptual category through which we actually approach gender, class, caste, ethnicity, okay, to really make sense of how one experiences oneself, and the world around us. So thank you, for stating that. I am totally on board with you. Talking about the trans law, now which has been finally enacted. The first thing, and I think this is, there are a range of problems with that legislation, okay? And I think, I would be happy to actually share with you, like I can send you stuff on that. But the only thing that I want to talk about today, in responding to you, is the category trans. And I think, Anita, that in the Indian context, we really have not been able to conceptually approach trans as a category, or transgender as a category. And this played out, so much when it was defined in the earlier version of the bill. Transgender was defined as everything that you could think of. People who recognize themselves as both male and female, or none, or genderqueer, or asexual, or intersex, everything that you could, the spectrum of sexual identities were brought under trans as a category. And I think, to start with, this is the biggest problem, which has been slightly rectified in the new definition. So the new definition is not so stupid to say that a trans person is someone who recognizes as both male and female, and doesn't talk in terms of those binaries. It has been revised. But the first thing, but the point that I'm trying to say is that still there is not enough discussion or debate in India, I would say, around conceptual category, which is trans. Okay, and for this, I think the work of feminist scholars like Jacqueline Rose, okay, is extremely, British psychoanalytic feminist Jacqueline Rose is very, very important to us, because I think we have to bring in, till now, we are only working on the intersection of law, political science, social science, humanities. I think we really have to bring in the discipline of psychoanalysis to understand certain categories, okay? And like transfer, for example. Okay. Besides that, the kind of bureaucratic demands that the new law makes on the trans subject are a problem in themselves. You know, I can take you through their various sections which require them, which require them to, to actually align themselves with the bureaucratic machinery which has been set up, under the aegis of this act. That is a problem. And very, I mean, I don't remember the sections exactly, so maybe, we will require different sessions, but on both these levels, in fact, there is a writ petition pending, which says that, and I'm just like speaking of the, I don't have that in front of me, but definitely it challenges section 4, 5, 6, 7 of the Transgender Act as violative of Article 14, 15, 19, and 21, which are, which all these sections, are being challenged by trans activists themselves. So one more thing, that trans law 2019 violates the Nalsa judgment, which was much more progressive, much more broader in terms of the rights that were, granted by the Supreme Court. Okay. Is another problem, and we all know what the Nalsa, what the extent of the Nalsa judgment. Another thing that again, which has not been discussed widely, and very few people like Dr. Ashley Tellis, I heard him at one forum. He was the one, who was categorical, and he really set me thinking around it. He said that in the trans bill, the sex worker is lost, and the sex worker has to be an integral part of this particular legislation, because most of a lot of hijras are into sex work. Okay, and that is completely erased. That is still, something that is not, that is not, I would say, legalized. That is not, seen to be acceptable. So we're really not, when we are approaching this sexual minority, okay, we are not understanding who we are making the law for, number one, and whether the rights that are being accorded to that sexual minority through this act, whether those rights are actually what they want, or do they want something else. On both these levels, the law is problematic. Sorry.
Ma'am, you're mute. Anita, ma'am.
Yeah, you meant Ashley, right? Ashley,
Yes.
You meant Ashley, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There's a question in the chat box. So, ma'am, there's no questions. Ma'am, I would like to ask you something.
Yes,
so, you talked about how the very concept of common good that we have is gendered in itself. Could you please elaborate on that a bit?
Yes, I would say that it reminds me, like I can speak through the cases, right? So there was a case which was filed against the Bombay municipality in 1980s, which is famously called the slum dwellers case, right? And this, there was an eviction order against the slum dwellers, and they went to the court and they said, we have a right to shelter. Okay, we have a right to livelihood, and if we are going to be evicted, then we would not have any place to go to. On the other hand, there were these elite groups, who were arguing that our city looks cluttered, our city looks, unhygienic, because people are living on the pavement, bathing on the pavement, and so on and so forth. Now, these people, the court actually upheld the eviction order, okay, and a lot of people, around 1,000 people, were evicted, and most of them women, okay, and children, women who were working in the nearby areas, who could actually leave their children behind, okay, because they were the primary caregivers. Men were going off to work, at distant places. Women could actually work in nearby areas, come back and feed their children, look after their children. The entire, the whole habitus for them was completely changed. They were totally uprooted, actually uprooted from their livelihood. They had to give up their jobs, and of course they had to sit back at home, if they were displaced, because they were the ones, who had to take care of their children, right? So the displacement, the real effects of displacement were more on this, on definitely a particular class of women, but also the way it played out in their real life is something that was totally erased in the judicial imagination when they talked about eviction in terms of the common good. That common good requires that pavements, that the people should have access to pavements, that there should not be, there should not be unhygienic conditions. These people don't have, toilets, so they squat on the pavements, right? So the common good was imagined from the vantage point of the elites of Mumbai, but also the male elites, also from the vantage point of men, right? Because women were not in that imagination at all. Again, taking back to the point of intersectionality, class and gender really intersected in very, very complex ways there. So I mean,
Thank
and
you
then
so much.
yeah, go on.
No, ma'am, you were saying something.
No, I'm saying, so this is these categories are never really opened up by the court, right? They're just they look at these categories only from as if they just have to do this balancing act between two conflicting rights. It is much more than that, is what I'm saying.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, since there are no other questions, I would like to ask another. So, ma'am, you talked about that how the legal professionals need to be gender conscious and also conscious of the intersectionality that prevails in our society at this point. We don't know, right? Uh, as non-law professionals right now, we don't actually know that how the curriculum actually is, whether be it of the judges या फिर जो lawyers का curriculum होता है. So, ma'am, how can that be, developed so that gender sensitive subjects and themes are inculcated at a curriculum level if possible?
I think to start with, gender should never be an optional subject. Okay, I mean, the moment you relegate it to an optional subject, I think we are doomed.
I totally agree. And we have fought our way through, while making the curriculum, at least for political science, it has been a struggle. It has really been a struggle. At least when I got appointed in Kalindi College, Latika, I must share this with you. When I got appointed in Kalindi College, I was barely around 25 years of age. It was like maybe 16 years back, and it was a struggle to get this course, which was an optional course in Delhi University. It was previously taught by Nivedita Menon, just to get the course for the students to teach, because what was being told is that it's a subject, it's an optional course, will students pick it up, the kind. In fact, when I did in the law faculty itself, in the gender justice course, we were only 6 of us.
Yeah,
it was only 6 of us. It's just ridiculous that people think that gender is a no man's land. Anybody anytime can jump on it. So it's like a train driven by nobody. So it's very important. It is very important that as feminists also, and that how the UGC has actually cut down upon the Women's Studies Center. I was having a talk with Rukmini. She's coming tomorrow, by the way.
Okay,
so I was having a talk with Rukmini. She's a very dear friend of mine, and she was
wonderful.
telling that, look, how the women's studies centers are actually getting more and more marginalized. Okay, so unless all the courses come together to say that we want gender as a primary, intake in our curriculum, I think nothing is going to change. It will just be another optional course, and that to an optional course which is right at the periphery, end of the periphery.
Yeah, absolutely. They're very comfortable with women. So I mean, my experience at ILI was that, okay, you want to do women's rights, great, okay, but the moment you you say that no, gender has to be taught in constitutional law courses when you're talking about federalism, in IPR, intellectual property right, in taxation, for God's sake. So then everyone's like, what are you talking about? Like, have you gone insane? They look at you, as if you've lost your mind. But I totally agree with you that we really have to stop this, that, it is an optional course, or it is one of the electives, the way it is in law faculty. And that elective is also, I'm sure, I wonder what your experience of that elective was. Mine wasn't very great. So, but it has to be taught when we are teaching constitution, when we are teaching property law, when we are teaching jurisprudence. Can you believe it? Jurisprudence is taught without gender sexuality debates. It's unbelievable. So yes, so that, I think that is required, Sanskriti, at all levels. This has to be, and I think very, very importantly for law, because law is still taught, is still taught in a very isolated way, and and even though it is taught in the most banal way, lawyers tend to have an arrogance about themselves, So I think that has to be busted through some gender training from the very beginning. Though I certainly also think, Anita, it is true for a discipline which has not been taken seriously in Indian academia, and which is psychoanalysis. And Ambedkar University definitely takes it, in their MA courses. They do, psychoanalytic oriented teaching. But that is also a marginalized discipline. And Western feminists like Juliet Mitchell, Jacqueline Rose, who have been in the forefront since 1960s, they have told us that psychoanalysis is so important to understand why feminism, Juliet Mitchell says, is going to be the longest revolution. It is going to be the longest revolution because of this, again, her expression, an undertow that keeps pulling us back again and again. There's something in us that we keep going back despite, we take 10 steps ahead, and 20 steps backwards. So that regression has to be understood, and it can't be done until we understand psyche. Sanskriti, you had used the word soch, I would use the word psyche, our internal contradictions, our complicity in our own subjugation. Okay, our psychic investment in violent institutions, of family, community, nation, the way Uma Chakravarti has spelled it out quite well for us. So yeah, I think I agree with you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'll just check the chat box.
And on the Trans Act, Anita, if maybe, like, if you will, I would love to actually read the act with interested students, even if it's an informal setting, because it's a very, very important law that has to be that has to be looked at. I want that you see it for yourself. The legal provisions are there in front of you and me, and then we are able to engage with it and see huge problems in the act. Maybe, like, some other time, some other life.
Thank you so
I'm
much,
going to
ma'am.
get you back, Latika. I'm going to teach this course this time. We actually, I joined back college after, a gap. So I am planning to take this course up again, which is feminism. So I'm going to get you back, in my classroom. Because, at least this bit on psychoanalysis and the way you're saying that the intersectionalities, I really need to have greater discussions, maybe personal discussions.
I would love that. I would love that. I think we have to have that community. We have to create that academic community where we can talk to each other, even though we are stuck in a lockdown. Yeah, I mean, it has been so depressing. So we need to actually start conversations.
Yeah. Sanskriti, you can.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was really very, very, very good. I personally am elated to have you with us today. Now I would like to call upon Dr. Manisha Tomar, ma'am, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Sanskriti. So am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, a very warm good evening to one and all present here. On behalf of WDC Kalindi College, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Latika Vashisth from Indian Law Institute for her thought-provoking address and answering the curiosities of all of us on women and Indian Constitution. More often, we don't speak as we are not aware of laws and rights. But after today's session, ma'am, I am sure that all of us have become more aware of our legal rights. So, all thanks to your elaborate explanations. I sincerely thank you, ma'am, and hope that we'll be hearing from you in future as well. I would like to thank Ms. Rajni Nagpal, the chairperson governing body, Madam Principal Naina Hasija for their unconditional and continuous support. They have always inspired us to go beyond our limits and achieve excellence. We thank you for being with us throughout, ma'am. I very specially thanks to Dr. Sweetie, Dr. Ankur, Dr. Reshu, Dr. Manoj, Dr. Sapna, Dr. Neha, and our non-teaching staff, Ms. Asha and Mr. Vinay, for making this program live on YouTube. Also, a very, very special thanks to Dr. Anita Tagore, our convener, Dr. Vandana, our co-convener, and WDC members, Dr. Baljeet, Dr. Nutan, and Ms. Madhuli for successfully organizing today's program. I truly appreciate the efforts put in all by our students who have been with us all through. Sanskriti, Himanshi, Saraswati, Nikita, Ujala, Kanishka, Bindu, Rishika, and of course our journalism students, Nandini, Mukta, Shivani, Namya, Tanushri, Mudita, Bhavna, and Priti. I can't thank everyone enough for the involvement they have shown and the willingness they have expressed to take on the completion of their task. Today's program wouldn't have been possible without active participation of participants joining us from across India on Meet and YouTube. I really thank all of you for your enthusiastic participation and hope to see you again tomorrow at 5 in the evening. At the end, I request all the participants to fill the feedback form link, for which link has already been shared in the chat box. Once again, thank you so much to all who have virtually assembled here and made the event a big success today. Have a great time ahead. Thank you so much.
Manisha,
Over
can
to
we
you,
just have
Saskia.
a final screenshot of everybody? Everybody can put on their videos, all students and teachers and WBC members, and we can have a screenshot with our guest, and then maybe we can move ahead. Madhuri, Baljeet, Nutan, I think all of you should be on screen.
Just a second. Done, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Latika. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Namaskar.
Ma'am, you're mute. Anita, ma'am. हाँ जी भाई
सारे बच्चे जा सकते हैं. It's only the WBC teachers who are here. Mommy, mommy, mommy.